When I opened my eyes, the world looked unfamiliar, like a dream stitched together from fragments of my old life. The light above me was too white, too sharp. A woman in blue scrubs gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "She's awake," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break me again. Awake? The word hung in my mind like a question. Awake from what? My throat burned when I tried to speak, and only a soft croak escaped me. The nurse pressed a cup of water to my lips, and I drank greedily, the liquid feeling like life itself. Then came the confusion. The calendar on the wall said 2023. My last memory was from 2021. 2 Christmases had passed without me, 2 years gone, just like that. They told me I'd been in a coma after the accident. "A freak fall," they said. "Slipped in the kitchen, hit my head, brain swelling, no response for months. They said my survival was a miracle." But as I lay there, tubes still snaking from my arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper, darker, had been done to me, not just by fate, but by someone I loved. When my son Michael finally walked in, he didn't look like the man I remembered. His eyes darted around the room, his smile rehearsed. "Mom," he said softly, leaning over to kiss my forehead, "you're back. You scared us." I wanted to cry, but my body was too weak. Instead, I studied his face, the faint lines of guilt around his mouth, the way he couldn't meet my eyes for too long. My mother's instinct whispered something wasn't right. Over the next few days, I listened. I asked questions. Little ones at first about my house, my garden, the neighbors. Each time Michael's answers grew shorter. He kept saying, "Don't worry about all that now, Mom. Focus on getting better." But I couldn't stop worrying. The house, my late husband's house, was everything. It held 50 years of memories, from our wedding photograph above the fireplace to the old piano I'd promised to give my granddaughter. The very thought of it kept me awake at night in that sterile hospital bed. One afternoon, when the nurse brought my mail, I noticed a letter with my old address crossed out and a new one written in its place, an address I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I asked, "Where is that from?" The nurse smiled. "That's your son's address, dear. It says to forward all correspondence there." "Forward all correspondence?" My heart thudded. Why would Michael be collecting my mail? When I finally left the hospital, the air outside felt too fresh, too alive. I wanted to go home, to smell my garden, to touch the old curtains that my husband and I had picked together decades ago. But instead of driving me there, Michael took a different route. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To my place," he said, "just until you're stronger." I looked out the window, no familiar streets, no old willow tree that once shaded our front porch, just strange houses, clean lawns, and a hollow in my chest. At his home, a small, modern apartment, I sat on the couch, clutching my purse like it was my only anchor to the past. "Michael," I said quietly, "I want to go home. I miss it." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom, there's something you need to know." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He couldn't look at me. "The house, it's gone. We had to sell it." The words sliced through me. "You what?" He began explaining, his voice full of rehearsed sorrow, how the medical bills were piling up, how he and my daughter-in-law, Claire, couldn't afford the upkeep, how it was for the best. But none of it made sense. I had savings. I had insurance. My husband left me comfortable, not rich, but safe. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered, "You sold my house while I was sleeping?" He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. "It wasn't just the house," he added softly. "We sold the furniture too. The car. Everything. Everything." That word hollowed me out. My life's work, the porcelain teacups I'd collected from every anniversary, the embroidered quilt from my grandmother, the music box that still played our wedding song, all gone. That night, I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a clock that wasn't mine. I tried to cry quietly, but the sobs came anyway, years of silence breaking through. I thought about my late husband, about how angry he would have been. Something was wrong. This wasn't just necessity, this was betrayal. Days turned into weeks. My strength returned, but my trust in my family began to fade. Claire avoided me completely, and when she did speak, it was through tight smiles and forced politeness. Their daughter Lily, once my little sunshine, barely said hello. One morning, while Michael was at work, I wandered to the kitchen to make tea. I opened the wrong cabinet and froze. Inside, neatly stacked, were boxes labeled "Estate Auction Property of M. Daniels," my maiden name, not his, mine. The lid of one box was half open. I pulled it down and gasped. Inside were photos of me and my husband, our wedding certificate, my jewelry box, even the letters he'd written to me during his years overseas. They hadn't sold everything. They'd kept the valuables, hidden them. My breath came fast. I grabbed one photo, the one from our honeymoon, and slipped it under my sweater. I felt like a thief in my own family's home. That night, at dinner, I stared across the table at my son, this stranger who once called me Mama. The shadows on his face seemed darker now. "Michael," I said softly, "did you sell everything?" He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Of course," he muttered. "Why?" I looked straight into his eyes. "Then why are my things in your kitchen cabinet?" The silence that followed was deafening. Claire dropped her fork. Lily looked from me to her father, confused. Michael's face went pale. "Mom, you shouldn't have been snooping." "Snooping?" My voice cracked. "You took my life and called it caregiving." He stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "You don't understand." "No," I said, trembling. "I understand perfectly now. But deep inside, even in my anger, another question began to rise, something I'd been too afraid to ask. What if the accident wasn't an accident at all? As I went to bed that night, I replayed that thought over and over. The wet floor, the shattered vase, the darkness before the coma. There was a sound. I remembered a sharp argument, Michael's voice raised, the slam of a door, and then the fall. My son said I'd slipped. But what if I'd been pushed? The truth, I realized, hadn't been lost in those 2 years. It had been buried by the very people who were supposed to love me. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my heart pounding from a dream I couldn't quite remember. Only flashes me falling backward, a flash of light, someone shouting my name. I sat up slowly, the air cold against my skin, and stared out the window. The city lights blinked in the distance like indifferent stars. I whispered to myself, "You didn't just fall. Someone made you fall." The thought refused to leave me. I carried it like a weight as I sipped my tea, pretending to be calm while my mind spun. Every sound in that apartment, the creak of a floorboard, the whisper of the kettle felt like part of some sinister rhythm I hadn't noticed before. When Michael came into the kitchen, his hair uncombed and his expression guarded, I forced a smile. "Morning, sweetheart," I said as if nothing had changed. He studied me, suspicious, but nodded. "Morning, Mom. How are you feeling?" "Better," I replied softly. "Much better." He seemed relieved, but I could see his guard lowering just slightly. That was good. I needed him to think I was fragile, still recovering. The more he underestimated me, the closer I could get to the truth. After he left for work, I waited for Claire to leave too. She always went to her Pilates class around 9. The moment the door shut, I shuffled to the cabinet again, pulled down another box, and opened it carefully. Inside were documents, bank statements, property papers, even my husband's will. My name was everywhere, crossed out, replaced by Michael's scrawled handwriting. My breath caught. He'd forged my signature. He'd transferred everything, the house, the savings account, even my husband's pension, into his name. I sat there, trembling, clutching one of the papers. My own child, my flesh and blood. He'd stolen my life while I slept in a hospital bed. The betrayal was so sharp, it almost made me sick. But beneath the heartbreak, something else stirred, a quiet, deliberate kind of anger, the kind that didn't shout or cry, the kind that planned. I put the papers back exactly as they were, closed the lid, and took one envelope, just one to keep as proof. Then I slid it inside my robe pocket. When Claire came home, I pretended to be napping on the couch. She walked past me without a word, humming to herself. Her phone buzzed, and she answered quickly, her voice low. I strained to listen. "Yes, she's still here," she whispered. "No, she doesn't suspect anything, but we need to handle the storage before she finds out." Handle the storage. My pulse quickened. What storage? After she hung up, she left the phone on the counter while unpacking groceries. My hands trembled, but I couldn't resist. I picked it up and glanced at the recent call log. The last number was labeled Mr. Green. Auction. Auction. There it was again. I knew then I couldn't stay under their roof. I needed to see for myself what they'd done. That night, when everyone was asleep, I slipped into the small guest room where they'd kept my old purse. My ID was gone, my credit cards missing, but they'd overlooked one thing. Inside a hidden pocket was the spare key to my storage locker downtown. It had been years since I'd gone there back when my husband was alive. We'd used it to store old photo albums and his army medals. But maybe, just maybe, something of mine had survived their greed. The next morning, I told Michael I wanted some fresh air. "I'll just go for a walk," I said sweetly. He hesitated but nodded, handing me his old phone in case you get lost. He thought he was being kind, but really, it was just another leash. I tucked it into my pocket and smiled. I'll be careful. Outside, the winter wind bit through my coat, but it felt good real. The world was still mine, no matter what they'd taken. I flagged down a cab and gave the driver the storage address, my hands shaking as I spoke. When we arrived, I stood before the metal door, my breath fogging in the cold air. The key turned stiffly in the lock. The hinges groaned as I lifted the door. Inside, dust hung in the sunlight like ghosts of the past. At first, I thought the unit was empty. Then I saw it in the corner, under a tarp. My old cedar chest. I knelt down, pulled back the covering, and nearly broke into tears. Inside were my husband's journals, my photo albums, and most painfully, his wedding ring. They'd missed this. They hadn't found everything. I held the ring to my heart and whispered, "You still protect me, don't you?" Then something caught my eye, a receipt tucked between two of the albums. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was from Green Estate Auctions, dated 6 months after my coma began. A list of items followed: antique clock, jewelry, art prints, piano, china, set every precious thing I'd ever owned. Signed by Michael Daniels. My breath hitched. 6 months after my coma. They'd waited just long enough to make it look necessary. And then, at the bottom of the receipt, I saw something else, a notation. Balance payment transferred to Claire D., my daughter-in-law. She wasn't just complicit. She'd been paid. I sank to the floor, the cold concrete seeping into my knees. Every lie they'd told me spun together like a storm in my mind. I stayed like that for what felt like hours, the silence pressing down until I could barely breathe. Then a voice broke the air. "Mrs. Daniels?" I turned sharply. A man stood in the doorway, thin, with glasses, holding a clipboard. "You scared me," I said, my voice shaking. "Sorry," he said. "We were about to close up. Are you taking anything with you today?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Just this box." He helped me load it into a taxi, and as we drove away, I caught sight of him making a phone call. My gut twisted. Something about the way he glanced back at me, nervous, uncertain, set off alarm bells. By the time I reached the apartment, Michael was already waiting by the door. His jaw was tight, his voice low. "Where were you?" "I went for a walk," I said evenly. "With a taxi?" he snapped. "I got a call from the storage facility. They said you were there." My hands clenched around my purse. "And why would they call you?" he faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Because I'm handling your affairs, Mom. You're not supposed to be out alone." "My affairs," I repeated bitterly. "Is that what you call them? Affairs?" He stepped closer, his voice softening. "Please don't make this harder than it already is." That night, I locked my bedroom door and sat awake, listening for footsteps. I kept the proof, the auction receipt, and the bank document under my pillow like a weapon. I knew now I wasn't safe here, but before I could act, I needed one more thing: to remember exactly what happened the night of my fall. The memories were faint, buried under fog, but as I closed my eyes, fragments flickered. I remembered arguing with Michael. He wanted me to sign some papers, just in case something happened. I'd refused. He'd stormed out, slamming the door so hard the vase fell from the shelf. I'd gone to pick it up. muttering under my breath, and then I heard him come back. Angry, breathing hard, and then the push. I gasped, sitting upright in bed, my heart racing. It wasn't the floor that betrayed me. It was my son's hands. Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered into the darkness, "You tried to kill me, Michael." Outside my room, a shadow moved under the door crack. Quiet, still, listening. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the apartment made me flinch. Every shadow on the wall looked like a threat waiting to unfold. I lay still, eyes wide open, clutching the papers under my pillow as though they could shield me from the truth I'd just uncovered. My son had tried to kill me. The thought twisted inside my chest, sickening and unreal. When the first rays of dawn slipped through the curtains, I finally moved. Quietly, carefully, I opened the drawer of the bedside table and found an old notebook, one Claire had left there for me to jot my recovery thoughts. I turned to the back pages and began writing names, dates, memories. If anything happened to me again, someone had to know. By breakfast, I had my face arranged into calmness. Michael was sipping coffee, scrolling on his phone, while Claire buttered toast without looking up. Lily sat silently, staring at her cereal, clearly aware that something in the air had changed. I was thinking, I began softly, about going back to my old neighborhood today, just to see the garden. Michael's head snapped up. "Mom, we talked about this. The house isn't ours anymore." "I know," I said, meeting his eyes. "I just want to see it. From the outside." He hesitated, studying me. "It's not a good idea. The new owners don't like visitors." I smiled faintly. "Then I won't knock. I'll just take a walk down the lane. Please, Michael, I've been locked away from the world for 2 years. I need to breathe where my memories live." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, perhaps out of guilt or arrogance, he nodded. "Fine. But I'm driving you." I agreed. But in my heart, I was already planning something different. We drove in silence. When we turned onto Willow Lane, my heart clenched. The old house looked smaller, lonelier. The magnolia tree my husband planted was gone, replaced by a trimmed hedge. The new owners had painted the porch blue. I could barely recognize it. Michael parked a few houses down. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice tight. I stepped out slowly, breathing in the cool air. Memories washed over me, Christmas lights on the roof, laughter spilling from the kitchen, the smell of my husband's pipe on the porch. I walked toward the gate, my hands trembling. That was when I saw her, the woman next door, Mrs. Harper, my old neighbor. She was watering her plants and froze when she saw me. "Eleanor?" she gasped. "Oh, my goodness, is it really you?" I smiled weakly. "It's me, Mary. I'm back." She dropped the watering can and hurried over, tears in her eyes. "We thought you'd passed away." Your son said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear." My blood ran cold. "He said what?" Mary blinked. "He said the machines were turned off. That you didn't make it." The words slammed into me. My knees nearly buckled. "He told you I was dead?" Mary nodded, confused. Yes, that's what he told everyone. He sold the house a few weeks later, moved everything out. I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just stolen from me, he'd erased me. Before I could speak again, Michael's voice cut through the air. "Mom, time to go." He was standing by the car, eyes narrowed, jaw tight. Mary glanced at him nervously. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said quickly, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Mary. Take care." I shuffled back toward the car, my mind screaming. Inside, Michael's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Why were you talking to her?" he snapped. "She's my friend," I said calmly. "I was saying hello." His voice dropped to a hiss. "Don't talk to people about the past, Mom. It upsets everyone." "Or does it upset you?" I asked softly. He glared at me, but didn't answer. The rest of the drive was silent, thick with tension. When we reached the apartment, he stormed inside first, muttering under his breath. I stayed by the door, trembling, but this time, not with fear, with resolve. That evening, I waited until they were both asleep. Then I took the old phone Michael had given me and opened the call log. The number labeled Mr. Green, Auction, was still there. My hands shook as I pressed call. It rang twice before a man answered. Green Auctions. I swallowed hard. "Hello, this is Eleanor Daniels. I believe you handled an estate auction under my name 2 years ago." There was a pause. "Under your name?" "Yes, the property on Willow Lane." Another pause, then a sigh. "Mrs. Daniels, we were told you had passed away. Your son handled the sale personally. Is there a problem?" I felt my throat tighten. "A problem," I whispered. "My problem is that I was alive the entire time." The man sounded genuinely shocked. My God, I had no idea. He provided all the paperwork, death certificate and all. "I can send you copies if you want." A death certificate. My hands went numb. "Yes," I whispered. "Send them to me." When I hung up, I sat motionless for a long time. He'd forged everything my signature, my death, my very existence. I couldn't go to the police yet. I needed more proof. If I accused him without evidence, he'd twist it into confusion, blame my fragile recovery. I'd be painted as a senile woman with delusions. No, I needed undeniable truth. The next day I began watching them carefully. Michael left the apartment every morning at 9, returning around 6. Claire spent her afternoons on long phone calls, whispering about liquidations and final transfers. I pretended not to notice. One afternoon when she went out, I searched her desk drawers. Inside, beneath stacks of bills, I found a small key and a card. Safe deposit box, Silver Ridge Bank. My pulse raced. I knew what was inside. That evening, I waited until everyone was asleep. I slipped the key into my pocket, put on my coat, and quietly stepped out. The night air was sharp, the streets nearly empty. My reflection in the dark shop windows barely looked like me anymore, eyes tired, but burning with something fierce. When I reached the bank, the security guard eyed me curiously, but I explained I needed access to my box. My voice shook, but the key did its work. Inside the small metal drawer lay sealed envelopes, neatly labeled with my husband's name. I opened one and nearly cried out. It was my husband's real will, notarized and signed, the one that left everything to me, with instructions for our grandchildren's trust fund. And then I saw another envelope, labeled insurance claim. I pulled it out. It was a life insurance payout filed under my name, marked deceased. Beneficiary Michael Daniels. Amount $480,000. The floor swayed beneath me. He hadn't just stolen my home. He'd stolen my death. I slipped the documents into my coat and hurried out, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo. Outside, the cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't care. I had proof now. When I returned home, the apartment was dark, quiet. I crept to my room and tucked the papers under the mattress, then sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. But just as I began to calm down, I noticed something. My door was ajar. I was certain I'd closed it, and from the crack of light in the hallway, I saw a shadow move past. Michael's voice drifted softly through the air. "She knows," another voice Claire's answered, whispering. "Then we have to finish it this time." The cup in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor, my breath caught in my throat. "Finish it this time." Those words rang in my ears like a death knell. I froze on the bed, terrified that even the sound of my heartbeat would give me away. My hands trembled as I reached for the lamp switch, then stopped. Darkness was my only shield. From the hallway came a creak, then the faintest whisper Claire's voice, low and urgent. "We can't do this again, Michael. Not now. She's awake. She's talking. It's too risky. She's dangerous," he hissed. "If she tells anyone, we lose everything. You think she's going to keep quiet after what she found?" There was a pause, the sound of feet shifting on the floor. "Then what are you saying?" Claire whispered. Michael's voice dropped to something cold, something I barely recognized as my son's. "I'm saying she should have stayed asleep. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. My eyes darted toward the window, old, stiff, maybe stuck, but it was the only way out. Slowly, I slid off the bed and crept toward it, keeping my steps light on the carpet. Then came the soft click of the door handle. I held my breath. The door opened a few inches. Their silhouettes appeared in the crack, two figures standing in the dim hallway, whispering fiercely. "I'll do it," Michael muttered. "You stay here. I'll make it look like an accident again." Again. I bit my lip so hard it bled, stifling a cry. He was going to finish what he started 2 years ago. As his shadow moved closer, I yanked at the window latch with shaking hands. It screeched, too loud, too slow. The door began to open wider. In one desperate burst, I shoved the window up and threw my leg over the sill. The cold night air slapped my face. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would burst. "Mom?" Michael's voice, calm but deadly, cut through the silence. I didn't look back. I pushed myself out and landed on the fire escape, my knees nearly buckling. My hands gripped the metal railing as I stumbled down the stairs, each clang echoing through the alley. I could hear him yelling behind me, his footsteps pounding on the floorboards. "Mom, stop! You're confused." But I wasn't confused anymore, not even a little. I ran. The street was dark and empty, the winter wind biting through my thin sweater. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. My legs screamed with pain, my chest heaving. I turned down one street, then another, until the glowing sign of a small all-night diner came into view. I stumbled inside, nearly collapsing at the counter. The waitress, a kind-looking woman with tired eyes, hurried over. "Honey, you okay?" My voice cracked. "I need to call the police," she blinked in surprise. "Of course. Sit down, sweetheart." She handed me a phone. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped it, but I managed to dial 911. The words tumbled out between ragged breaths. "My name is Eleanor Daniels. My son, he tried to kill me. He said I was dead. He forged everything. Please help me." The dispatcher's voice was calm but alert. "Ma'am, where are you right now?" I looked around. "Sunnyside Diner on Maple Street. Stay there," the voice said firmly. "We're sending a unit right now. Don't go anywhere." When I hung up, I buried my face in my hands. For a moment, I felt the weight of it all, the 2 lost years, the lies, the betrayal, the loneliness. My son, my only child, had turned me into a ghost to profit from my death. The waitress brought me tea, setting it gently before me. "Whatever it is, you're safe here, darling. Safe." The word sounded almost foreign, but safety is a fragile illusion. 10 minutes later, the bell above the diner door jingled and my heart stopped. Michael. He walked in slowly, his expression calm, almost rehearsed. He spotted me at once and approached, his hands raised as if to show peace. "Mom, what are you doing?" The waitress stepped between us. "Sir, she doesn't want to talk to you." Michael smiled politely. "It's all right. This is my mother. She's confused. She's been sick for a long time." My voice broke. "Don't listen to him. He tried to kill me." The few people in the diner turned to look. The waitress's eyes flickered uncertainly between us. "Sir, maybe you should wait outside until the police arrive." Michael froze, the charm slipping from his face. "You called the police?" "Yes," I said, clutching the teacup for strength. "And they know everything." He stared at me for a long moment, something dark moving behind his eyes. Then, just as the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, he turned and walked out without a word. When the police arrived, I told them everything about the coma, the forged documents, the life insurance claim, the death certificate. I gave them the address, the bank name, the proof under my mattress. They listened, patient but skeptical, until I handed over the papers. Then their faces changed. One of the officers, a woman with sharp eyes, said quietly, "We'll take it from here, ma'am. You did the right thing." At the hospital that night they kept me for observation. "Trauma," they said. "Exhaustion." I lay under the sterile lights again, the beeping machines around me eerily familiar. 2 years ago, I had been trapped in this same limbo alive, but silenced. Not anymore. By morning, Detective Harris came to see me. He placed a folder on my bedside table. "We've confirmed it, Mrs. Daniels," he said. "The documents were forged. Your son filed your death certificate using falsified hospital records. The insurance payout went directly to him and his wife. We've frozen their accounts. They're in custody." I closed my eyes, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. Relief, Sorrow, disbelief, they all came crashing together. "He's my son," I whispered, "my only child." The detective's voice softened. "Sometimes greed blinds even the people who should love us most." After he left, I stared out the window at the morning sky. The world looked strange again, like it had the day I woke from my coma, but this time it was different. I wasn't lost anymore. Days passed, and people from the community came to see me, Mary, the old neighbor, even the nurse who'd cared for me during my coma. They told me the story had reached the local news. The headline read, "Woman declared dead, wakes to expose family fraud." I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt old and tired and grateful to still be breathing. When the hospital discharged me, Mary offered her guest room. Her home was small, warm, filled with the smell of cinnamon and fresh laundry. It felt safe, but the silence sometimes broke me. I'd sit by the window at night, holding my husband's ring, whispering, "We survived, love. Somehow we did." Still, even as I began to heal, one thing haunted me, the memory of that night before my coma. His eyes, wild with anger, the shove, the crash, and the silence that followed, and I couldn't stop wondering, what made him that desperate? Because sometimes, even when the truth is out, it's only the beginning of another lie. Mary's guest room was quiet, too quiet. At night, I could hear the ticking of her old clock in the hallway, a sound that once meant comfort but now felt like a countdown. Every second reminded me that though Michael and Claire were in custody, I still didn't understand why. Why had my son, my baby, turned into a stranger capable of such cruelty? I sat by the window most evenings, a blanket over my knees, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The neighborhood children laughed as they rode their bicycles past, their joy cutting through the heavy silence like a cruel memory of the life I'd lost. Mary would bring me tea and try to smile. "They'll get what's coming to them, Eleanor," she'd say softly. "The court will handle it." But I wasn't looking for justice anymore. I was looking for answers. One afternoon, a man came to visit a lawyer named Grant Wallace. He introduced himself politely, setting down a folder on Mary's coffee table. "I'm representing you, Mrs. Daniels. The police said you might want some help untangling the financial mess your son left behind." I nodded faintly. "Untangling is one word for it," I murmured. "Ruining is another." He smiled kindly. "I've seen worse, but there's something unusual here. Something you may not be aware of." My chest tightened. "What do you mean?" He opened the folder. "Your husband's will. The original one, the one you found in the bank box, it's real? But it had an addendum added 5 years ago. Did you know that?" "No," I said slowly. "I didn't." He turned the paper toward me. There, in my husband's handwriting, was a clause I'd never seen before. "In the event of my wife's death or incapacitation, my estate shall transfer to my son, Michael Daniels, until such time as she is declared legally recovered." The word incapacitation burned itself into my brain. My voice trembled. "So, when I went into the coma," he nodded gravely, "your son was given temporary control. That's how he justified taking over your finances. The clause wasn't meant for this kind of abuse, of course, but legally, it gave him power." I stared at the page. feeling the room tilt. My husband, trying to protect me, had accidentally handed Michael the key to destroy me. "Mr. Wallace," I whispered. "Why would my husband even add that?" He hesitated, closing the folder gently. "That's what I was hoping you could tell me." I shook my head, lost. My husband had always trusted Michael. He adored him, called him our golden boy. But something flickered in my memory, a conversation I hadn't thought about in years. My husband, sitting at the kitchen table, looking worried, a letter in his hand. He'd said, "If anything ever happens to you, Ellie, promise me you'll keep the truth from Michael. It would destroy him." I'd laughed at the time, thinking he was being dramatic. But now, my blood ran cold. The truth from Michael. What truth? That night, I went through the old cedar chest again. Inside, beneath the photo albums, I found a bundle of letters tied with faded blue ribbon. Most were from our early marriage, sweet, innocent things. But near the bottom was one envelope with no postmark, just my husband's handwriting. "For Eleanor, if I'm gone." My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Ellie," it began, "if you're reading this, it means time has done what I feared most. There's something I never told you about Michael's birth, something I kept secret to protect everyone involved." I froze, my eyes darting ahead. "Michael was not born of our marriage, Ellie. You were in the hospital after your miscarriage, and your sister, Margaret, gave birth the same week. She wasn't married then, remember? The scandal would have ruined her. She begged me to help her. I did what I thought was right at the time. The papers were switched, and we raised Michael as our own. You never knew, and I never had the courage to tell you. But now, if anything ever happens, please understand that I loved you both too much to let the truth hurt you." The room spun. My vision blurred as tears flooded my eyes. My son, my betrayer, wasn't my blood. He was my nephew, my sister's child. I pressed a trembling hand to my mouth, a strangled sob escaping. The shock rippled through every vein in my body. All those years, I'd thought his distance, his resentment, came from selfishness. But maybe it came from something deeper, something inherited, unspoken. I read on, barely breathing. If Michael ever finds out, he'll hate me, he'll feel lied to, cheated, and I fear what that anger might do to him. Please, Ellie, if you can, forgive me. The paper slipped from my hands. I sat there, motionless, the clock ticking endlessly in the background. I could almost hear my husband's voice again, soft and broken. "Promise me you'll keep the truth from Michael." But somehow, he'd found out anyway. That was why he'd pushed me, why he'd forged everything, why he'd tried to erase me, because I represented the lie that shaped his life. I stayed up until dawn, staring at the letter, my heart a battlefield of grief and fury. When Mary came to check on me, she found me still sitting there, the paper crumpled in my lap. "Eleanor," she whispered, "you look like you've seen a ghost." I looked at her with hollow eyes. I think I finally understand why my son hated me. Over the next few days, the police case deepened. They found the death certificate, the forged medical files, the insurance claim, but now something new surfaced. Detective Harris returned, looking uneasy. "Mrs. Daniels," he said gently, "I thought you should know your son's lawyer filed a statement this morning. He's claiming temporary insanity. Says he discovered recently that you weren't his biological mother. He said it caused severe psychological distress." I stared at him, the words cutting through me like ice. "He knows," I murmured. The detective nodded. "We're verifying the details, but it seems the information came from a relative, a woman named Margaret Hayes." My heart stopped. "My sister." He nodded again. "She's agreed to testify. She says she came forward after he threatened her." I pressed my hands to my face, sobbing quietly. The past I'd never known had crawled out of its grave, dragging everything with it. My husband's secret, my sister's shame, my son's hatred, it had all been waiting, festering, ready to explode. That night, I took the letter to the fireplace in Mary's living room. I stared at the flames, the paper trembling between my fingers. "You did what you thought was right," I whispered to my husband's memory. "But lies, even kind ones, always find their way home." I let the letter fall into the fire. It curled, blackened, and disappeared into ash. The truth was out now. Nothing could undo it, but deep down I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace, because for the first time I understood. The betrayal hadn't started when I fell. It had started long before, the moment we decided to build love on a lie. And yet, as I stared into the dying embers, a strange thought came to me. If Michael's rage was born of truth, what else had he learned that I hadn't? Because sometimes, when one secret burns away, another rises from the smoke. It took me 3 days to gather the courage to see her. Margaret, my sister, the one person left who held the final pieces of this nightmare. I hadn't seen her in nearly 15 years, not since my husband's funeral, when she stood in the back pew, eyes down, wearing guilt like perfume. When I called, her voice trembled through the receiver. "Ellie," she whispered, "I knew this day would come." I told her I wanted to talk not as enemies, not as sisters, but as 2 old women who'd seen too much to keep pretending. She agreed to meet me at her farmhouse, the one tucked behind the old train line where we'd played as children. The morning was cold, the sky a dull gray that pressed on everything. Mary insisted on driving me, refusing to let me go alone. "You've been through enough," she said firmly. "No more surprises, all right?" But I knew there would be one. There always was. When we arrived, Margaret was waiting by the porch. Her hair was silver now, her face lined and pale, but her eyes, those same piercing blue eyes we shared, still carried the weight of everything unspoken. "Ellie," she said softly, reaching out. I didn't take her hand. I just looked at her. "You told him, didn't you?" Tears welled instantly in her eyes. "He came to me last year," she whispered. "He said he'd found some of Dad's old paper's birth records, adoption notes. He already suspected something. I tried to deny it, but he wouldn't stop pressing. I told him the truth." My throat tightened, and that truth destroyed everything. "I thought he deserved to know who he was," she cried. All those years, living under a lie. Do you know what it's like to see your child grow up in someone else's arms and call another woman mother? Her words cut through me, but beneath her pain, I saw it the guilt, the regret that had been rotting her from the inside. He wasn't just angry, Ellie, she said, shaking. He was broken. He said you'd stolen his life, that you'd conspired with our father to erase me. He thought you were part of it. I sank into a chair on the porch, my legs suddenly weak. So he tried to erase me instead, Margaret sobbed into her hands. I never thought he'd go that far. I tried to talk him down. I told him none of it was your fault. But when I heard about your accident, her voice cracked. I knew what he'd done, and I kept quiet because I couldn't bear to lose him too. Her confession hit me harder than I expected. For 2 years, while I lay trapped between life and death, my sister had carried that silence like a cross. I looked at her, this woman who had once braided my hair, shared my secrets, stolen my lipstick, and cried with me when Mama died. Now she was the keeper of the darkest betrayal I'd ever faced. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I whispered. Her lips quivered. "Because when I found out you'd woken up, I thought you'd hate me." "I do," I said softly, "but I also pity you." The words hung between us like smoke. Mary, who had been standing quietly nearby, finally spoke. "Eleanor," she said gently, "you don't have to forgive her, but maybe you can stop carrying it." I looked out at the empty fields stretching beyond the porch. The wind rustled the dry grass, carrying echoes of childhood laughter, 2 little girls running barefoot before lies and loss turned them into strangers. "Do you remember the summer of '62? I asked suddenly. "When we built that silly fort by the creek?" Margaret blinked, startled. "Of course. You swore we'd never keep secrets from each other again," I said. "You made me promise, and I kept my promise. You didn't." She began to cry again, quietly this time, the kind of tears that come when there's nothing left to save. I stood slowly, every bone in my body aching with the weight of years. "Goodbye, Margaret." As I turned to leave, she reached out, grabbing my wrist. "Ellie, there's one more thing." I stopped, not looking at her. "That night," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The night of your fall," he called me. "After it happened, he said you'd hit your head and weren't breathing. He was panicking. I told him to call 911. But do you know what he said?" I turned then, my stomach twisting. "What?" he said. "It's better this way?" The world seemed to go silent. The air froze between us. I pulled my hand free and walked down the steps, my vision blurring with tears. There was no more truth I needed. I'd heard enough to last a lifetime. On the drive back, Mary didn't speak. She just reached over once and squeezed my hand, her warmth steady against my trembling fingers. That night, I sat by the window again, the same way I had on the first night I woke from my coma. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was full of ghosts, full of memories, full of the quiet kind of peace that only comes after war. I thought of my husband and whispered, "You tried to protect us all. You just didn't know the price." The trial came and went in the months that followed. Michael pled guilty after weeks of silence in his cell. The world called him greedy, cruel, monstrous, but I knew better. He was broken, built on lies he never asked for, carrying a burden he didn't understand until it crushed him. The judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I stood in the courtroom, fragile but unbowed, and looked at the son who wasn't mine. His hair was unkempt, his eyes hollow, but for a brief moment he looked like the little boy who once brought me dandelions from the yard. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." He didn't cry. He just bowed his head, a single tear tracing down his cheek before the guards led him away. Afterward, I moved back to the countryside. Mary helped me buy a small cottage by the lake. I filled it with second-hand furniture, old books, and quiet mornings. Some days I still talk to my husband's photo, or to the magnolia tree I planted in memory of the one we lost. People sometimes ask how I survived it all, the coma, the betrayal, the loss. I tell them the truth. You don't survive. You just learn to keep breathing. Every now and then, I dream of that moment, the fall, the darkness, the long, soundless drift between life and death. In that silence, I always hear a voice whispering, "Wake up, Ellie. You're not done yet." And maybe that's what life is, a long waking from the lies we tell ourselves. As I sit on the porch each evening, the wind in the trees sounds almost like laughter. Maybe my husband's, maybe Margaret's, maybe even Michael's, when he was small and innocent, and mine in every way that mattered. I close my eyes and whisper into the dusk. You can't sell a soul, no matter how you try. And mine's still here. The lake glimmers softly as the sun sinks behind it, the day giving way to peace. For the first time in years, I feel something close to home, and that, at last, is enough.